"Sir, we reserve the window tables for guests who actually look like they belong here." The whisper wasn't meant to travel, but it did, sliding across polished marble floors and warm morning light like a draft through a quiet room. And Marcus Ellington heard every word as he stepped into the breakfast lounge at 8:12 a.m. The restaurant sat inside the top floor of the Harborline Grand, a place where fresh orange juice cost $9, and the scent of roasted coffee drifted through the air like a promise of comfort, where businessmen in navy suits skimmed emails and couples spoke softly over avocado toast, and where Marcus Ellington walked in wearing dark jeans, a charcoal hoodie, and simple sneakers that looked more like something from a neighborhood cafe than a place overlooking the San Diego Marina. The hostess, a blonde woman with a tight smile and sharper eyes, glanced at him once, then leaned toward the floor manager standing beside her. But her voice, meant to be private, traveled anyway, and the manager nodded before turning toward Marcus with a practiced politeness that felt colder than the air conditioning. "Good morning," the manager said, scanning him quickly. "Do you have a reservation?" Marcus gave a calm nod. "Marcus," he said simply. The manager tapped the screen, paused, then tilted his head. "We're a bit full this morning," he replied, even though half the tables near the window sat empty, sunlight pouring over untouched plates and folded linen napkins. Marcus followed his gaze, noticed the empty seats, then looked back without saying a word. The manager shifted slightly, uncomfortable for a moment, before gesturing toward a small table near the kitchen doors where the clatter of dishes and low voices drifted through swinging panels. "We can seat you there if you'd like." Marcus nodded once. "That's fine." He walked slowly across the polished floor, aware of a few glances following him, some curious, some indifferent, one or two lingering longer than necessary. He sat down, placed his phone beside the menu, and quietly observed. A server passed by his table twice without stopping, then a third time without eye contact, while a couple that arrived 5 minutes after him was seated at a window table, greeted warmly, and handed menus within seconds. Marcus leaned back slightly, calm, still, as if measuring the rhythm of the room. He watched the sunlight reflect off glassware, listened to the soft clink of silverware, and waited. 5 minutes passed, then 7. Finally, a young server approached, placing a glass of water down without speaking. Marcus looked up, offering a small nod. "Coffee, please," he said calmly. The server hesitated, then scribbled something quickly before walking away, and from across the room, the manager watched again, arms folded lightly, posture stiff. Marcus didn't react. He simply sat, composed, like someone who had seen this pattern before, like someone who understood that the quiet moments often revealed more than confrontation ever could. At 8:21 a.m., the whisper started again, softer this time. From a different corner, a young employee leaning toward another, eyes widening slightly as she looked toward Marcus. "Wait," she murmured carefully, her voice barely audible, but just enough to shift the air again. "Is that him?" And in that moment, the calm rhythm of breakfast began to change. The young employee who whispered did not move at first, her eyes fixed on Marcus Ellington, as if she were trying to confirm something her mind had not fully accepted yet. And beside her another server followed her gaze, curiosity replacing routine as the quiet hum of breakfast continued around them, sunlight now stretching further across the window tables, while coffee cups clinked softly against saucers. And Marcus remained seated near the kitchen doors, still calm, still observing, his untouched water glass catching the light as he glanced briefly toward the marina outside before returning his attention to the rhythm of the room. Because he had seen this before, not once, not twice, but across years of restaurants, hotels, and boardrooms where silence often revealed what policies tried to hide. And at 8:24 a.m. the young employee stepped closer to the service station, lowering her voice again as she leaned toward the other server, her tone careful, almost hesitant. "I think that is Marcus Ellington," she said quietly, and the other server blinked, glancing quickly toward the corner table near the kitchen doors, then back again. "No way," he murmured, but the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him, and the whisper moved again, subtle but undeniable, traveling from one employee to another like a ripple under still water, while the floor manager continued watching from across the room, unaware that the atmosphere had begun shifting, because to him Marcus was still just another guest dressed too casually for a premium breakfast lounge. Another assumption wrapped in routine, and meanwhile Marcus checked his watch, noting the time with the same calm patience that had guided him through countless negotiations, then lifted the menu again even though he had already read it twice. Because patience, to him, was not passive, it was deliberate, and at 8:26 a.m. the young server returned with coffee, setting it down carefully this time, her movements slower, more deliberate than before. "Here you go, sir," she said, her voice slightly different now, more cautious, more respectful, and Marcus nodded politely. "Thank you," he replied, his tone even, and the server lingered for half a second longer than necessary before stepping away, glancing back once, as if confirming what she had begun to suspect, and across the room the couple at the window table laughed softly while another businessman folded his newspaper, unaware that a quiet shift was building beneath the surface. And near the service station the whisper returned again, the young employee now speaking more urgently. "I saw him last month in the company newsletter," she said softly, and the other server leaned closer, his brow tightening. "You mean the CEO?" he asked, barely audible, and she nodded once, her eyes still locked toward Marcus, and the moment hung in the air, fragile but powerful, while the floor manager finally stepped forward again, approaching Marcus's table with the same measured confidence he had shown earlier, his posture straight, his expression controlled. "Sir, just to let you know, we may need this table shortly," he said, gesturing subtly toward the small space near the kitchen doors, even though the room remained half empty. And Marcus looked up calmly, meeting his gaze without tension. "That is fine," he replied quietly, and as the manager turned away, the young employee took a small step forward, her heartbeat quickening, her voice barely above a whisper as she spoke to the colleague beside her. "If that really is him," she said carefully, "this entire place is about to change." The quiet tension that began as a whisper now settled into the room like a change in temperature, subtle but unmistakable. And at 8:29 a.m. Marcus Ellington lifted his coffee cup slowly, the steam rising in thin curls as he watched the floor manager redirect another couple to the window tables, even though he had just been told space was limited, and the inconsistency did not go unnoticed, not by Marcus, and not by the young employee who had started the whisper, whose eyes moved back and forth between the seating chart and the nearly empty tables glowing under the California morning sun, while the marina below shimmered with soft reflections of boats drifting slowly in the harbor. And inside the restaurant the contrast between elegance and quiet discomfort grew sharper by the second, and a server passed Marcus. Again, this time pausing only long enough to drop a folded napkin without making eye contact, then turning immediately to greet a newly arrived guest with an enthusiastic smile. "Good morning, welcome in." The difference in tone subtle but clear, and Marcus noticed, not with frustration, but with the same calm awareness that had guided him through years of observing human behavior before making decisions. And at 8:31 a.m. the young employee stepped closer to the service counter, her voice lower, now, but firmer. "I am serious. I think that is him," she said again. And another employee glanced toward Marcus, squinting slightly as recognition slowly formed. "I saw him during the Leadership Summit video," he whispered back, and the realization began spreading, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, one pair of eyes at a time, while the floor manager remained focused on the entrance, greeting a businessman in a tailored navy suit and leading him to a prime table near the glass windows. And Marcus set his coffee down, his expression unchanged, as if he were measuring the room with patience instead of reacting to it. And a moment later the young server returned again, this time more attentive. "Would you like to order, sir?" she asked politely, her voice noticeably warmer, and Marcus nodded gently. "I will have the eggs, whole wheat toast, and fresh fruit," he said calmly, and she wrote it down carefully, almost deliberately, as if aware that every movement now mattered. And across the room another employee leaned toward her colleague, whispering just loud enough to shift attention again. "If that really is Marcus Ellington, he owns this entire restaurant group." And the words landed softly but powerfully, like a quiet bell echoing beneath conversation, and one by one the staff began glancing toward the corner table near the kitchen doors, their posture subtly changing, their movements slower, more cautious, while the Floor manager finally noticed the unusual attention and turned slightly, following their gaze. His eyes landing on Marcus again, but this time something felt different, something he could not quite identify yet. And at 8:34 a.m. Marcus folded his hands calmly on the table, his posture relaxed, his presence steady, as if he had all the time in the world, because for Marcus Ellington, the moment when people realized the truth was never loud. It was quiet, and it always began with a whisper. At 8:36 a.m. the atmosphere inside the breakfast lounge shifted again, not loudly, but with a subtle tightening that moved through the staff like a quiet signal, and the young employee who first whispered finally stepped forward, her name tag reading Emily Carter. Her posture hesitant but determined as she moved toward the service station where two other servers stood pretending to polish glasses while watching Marcus Ellington from the corner of their eyes, and Emily leaned closer, her voice low but steady. "I am telling you, that is him," she said, her tone carrying more certainty now, and one of the servers swallowed slightly, glancing toward the corner table again where Marcus remained calm, reviewing the harbor through the tall glass windows as morning light reflected off the water below, and the realization began settling deeper, because Marcus did not look impatient, he did not wave for attention, he did not raise his voice, he simply observed, and that quiet confidence felt different from any guest they had seen before. And at 8:37 a.m. the floor manager noticed the cluster of employees near the service counter and walked over, his steps measured but slightly sharper than before. "Is there a problem?" he asked quietly, and Emily hesitated for a moment, then spoke carefully. "I think the guest near the kitchen doors might be Marcus Ellington," she said, and the manager blinked once, the name landing heavier than expected, his expression tightening slightly before. He looked back toward Marcus again, his eyes now searching for details he had missed earlier, the calm posture, the deliberate stillness, the quiet authority in the way Marcus sat without asking for anything. And the manager forced a small smile. "Let us not jump to conclusions," he replied, but his tone had changed, softer, less certain, and Emily nodded but did not step back, her voice still careful. "I saw him during the regional leadership video last quarter," she added, and another server nodded slowly. "Me too," he murmured, and the uncertainty began turning into awareness. While across the room Marcus's breakfast arrived, the young server placing the plate gently in front of him, her movements careful as she said, "Here you go, sir," and Marcus nodded politely. "Thank you," he replied, his voice calm, and he began eating slowly, measured, as if unaware of the tension building around him, but his eyes moved occasionally, quietly noting the change in posture among the staff, the glances, the hushed conversations, and at 8:39 a.m. the floor manager approached Marcus again, this time with a slightly different tone. "Is everything all right?" he asked, and Marcus looked up calmly, meeting his gaze with composed ease. "Yes, everything is fine," he answered, and the simplicity of the reply left the manager standing there for half a second longer than expected before he nodded and stepped away, and behind him Emily whispered again, softer but more certain now. "If that really is him, we are about to see something none of us expected," and the room, still filled with the quiet sounds of breakfast, began to feel like a stage waiting for the moment when the truth would finally step forward. At 8:42 a.m. the quiet elegance of the breakfast lounge began to feel heavier, as if the sunlight pouring through the floor-to-ceiling windows could not soften the tension building beneath polite smiles and clinking silverware, and Marcus Ellington continued eating slowly, unhurried, his movements measured as he sliced fresh fruit and lifted his coffee again. While across the room the floor manager stood near the host's stand watching him more carefully now, the earlier confidence in his posture replaced by a subtle stiffness that even the hostess noticed, and Emily Carter remained near the service station, her attention fixed on Marcus as memories flickered through her mind, recalling the leadership video from 2 months earlier where Marcus had addressed employees across the country, speaking about respect, culture, and the quiet details that shaped a guest's experience. And she remembered the calm tone of his voice, the steady gaze, the same presence now sitting just 20 feet away near the kitchen doors. And at 8:43 a.m. another guest entered, a middle-aged man in a tailored gray suit, and the hostess immediately greeted him warmly, leading him to a window table without hesitation. Even though Marcus had been told moments earlier that seating was limited, and Emily's jaw tightened slightly as she noticed the contrast, because now the pattern felt impossible to ignore, and Marcus noticed too, not with irritation, but with quiet awareness, his expression unchanged as he set his fork down and reached for his napkin. And in that moment, a brief memory surfaced in his mind, a small cafe in Chicago 15 years earlier, where he had stood waiting for a table while watching others seated ahead of him. The same polite tone, the same quiet dismissal, the same assumptions wrapped in courtesy, and back then he had left without saying a word, but that moment had stayed with him, shaping the way he built every restaurant under his leadership. And now here he was again, not angry, not reactive, simply observing whether those standards were truly lived or quietly ignored. And at 8:45 a.m. the floor manager approached once more, this time with a tone that tried to sound neutral but carried a trace of urgency. "Sir, we are expecting a larger party shortly, and we may need to reassign seating," he said, glancing toward Marcus's small table near the kitchen doors. And Marcus looked up calmly, meeting his eyes with quiet composure. "I have just started breakfast," he replied gently, and the manager hesitated, the words landing heavier than expected, and behind him Emily shifted slightly, watching closely as the moment stretched, and Marcus returned to his plate without raising his voice, without showing frustration, and that calm response seemed to unsettle the manager more than resistance would have, because silence left no argument to push against. And across the room the whisper returned once more, this time from another server who leaned toward Emily, his voice barely audible. "I checked the internal directory," he murmured carefully. "That really is him." And Emily exhaled slowly, her certainty now complete, and the realization moved again through the staff like a quiet wave, while Marcus remained seated, composed and patient, as if he already knew that the moment when truth surfaced did not need noise, it only needed time. At 8:48 a.m. the calm inside the breakfast lounge felt thinner now, like the quiet before a sudden shift, and Marcus Ellington finished the last bite of fruit before setting his fork down carefully, his movements steady, controlled, as if nothing around him had changed, while across the room Emily Carter watched the floor manager pacing near the host's stand. His earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty, he tried to hide behind routine gestures, adjusting menus, glancing toward the entrance, then back toward Marcus again, and the other staff members followed his movements with subtle tension, because the whisper had already spread and now the realization had begun, settling into their expressions. And at 8:49 a.m. Marcus reached for his phone, not dramatically, not urgently, just a quiet motion that barely drew attention, and he glanced at the screen briefly before placing it back on the table, his face calm, his posture relaxed. Yet something about the moment felt deliberate, and Emily noticed, her instincts sharpening as she leaned slightly closer to the service station, while the young server who had confirmed Marcus's identity whispered again, "If he is here quietly like this, he is watching something." And Emily nodded slowly, because she understood what that meant. And across the room the floor manager approached once more, his tone now more cautious than before. "Sir, how is everything tasting?" he asked, attempting a polite smile, and Marcus looked up calmly, meeting his eyes with composed ease. "It is good," he replied, his voice steady. And the simplicity of the answer left the manager lingering again, uncertain whether to continue or step away. And finally he nodded and turned back toward the host's stand, while Marcus lifted his coffee again, his gaze drifting briefly toward the marina outside, sunlight reflecting across the water, and then back to the room, quietly observing every movement, every subtle shift in tone. And at 8:51 a.m. Emily took a small step forward, her voice barely audible as she leaned toward another employee. "He is not reacting because he is measuring everything," she whispered, and the other employee nodded, glancing nervously toward the floor manager, and the tension tightened again as the hostess hesitated before seating another guest, her movements slower now, more careful, and Marcus noticed the difference, not with satisfaction, but with the same calm awareness that defined his presence. And then, quietly, he reached for his phone again, tapping once, a simple motion that lasted less than a second. And from that moment something invisible seemed to shift, because within minutes the floor manager's tablet buzzed softly in his hand, and he frowned slightly, glancing down at the screen as confusion crossed his face, while Emily watched from across the room, her heart beating faster, sensing the moment approaching, and Marcus remained seated, calm and composed, his hands resting lightly on the table, as if he had already set something in motion without saying a single word. At 8:54 a.m., the quiet buzz of the breakfast lounge felt noticeably different, as if the room itself sensed something shifting beneath the calm surface, and the floor manager looked down again at his tablet, his brows tightening as another notification appeared, his fingers tapping quickly while his posture stiffened, and Emily Carter watched carefully from the service station, her instincts telling her that whatever had just started was no coincidence, while Marcus Ellington remained seated, calm as ever, his coffee cup resting lightly in his hand, his gaze steady and thoughtful, and the marina outside shimmered in the morning light as if nothing inside the room had changed, yet the staff could feel it, a subtle unease moving through their routine, and the floor manager suddenly turned toward the hostess, lowering his voice. But Emily caught fragments. "Corporate review. Guest experience audit. Immediate," he murmured, and the hostess blinked, glancing toward Marcus without saying a word, while the server who had confirmed Marcus's identity leaned closer to Emily, whispering carefully, "This is not random," and Emily nodded slowly, her certainty now absolute. And at 8:56 a.m. the floor manager approached Marcus again, his confidence noticeably reduced, his tone cautious. "Sir, I just wanted to confirm everything is satisfactory," he said, and Marcus looked up calmly, his expression composed. "Everything is fine," he replied, and the calmness in his voice seemed to deepen. The manager's unease, because Marcus did not ask for anything, did not complain, did not accuse, he simply observed, and silence, in that moment, carried more weight than confrontation ever could, and behind the manager, Emily took a small step forward, her voice barely audible as she leaned toward another employee. "This is him," she whispered firmly, and the employee swallowed, glancing toward Marcus again. And the realization spread quickly now, no longer uncertain, no longer hesitant, just quiet understanding moving from one staff member to another, while the floor manager stepped back, glancing again at his tablet as another alert appeared, and the subtle shift became undeniable, because the hostess began straightening menus, the servers adjusted their posture, and even the tone of conversation near the service station softened, as if everyone sensed that something larger was unfolding. And at 8:58 a.m. Emily finally stepped closer to Marcus's table, her voice respectful but steady. "Sir, is there anything else I can bring you?" she asked gently, and Marcus looked up, meeting her eyes with calm recognition. "No, thank you," he replied, and she nodded, stepping back slowly, her heart steady now as she whispered softly to the server beside her. "That is Marcus Ellington." And this time the whisper did not fade. It settled into the room like a quiet truth, and across the breakfast lounge the staff exchanged glances. The floor manager paused mid-step, and the calm rhythm of the morning shifted completely as the truth finally revealed itself. At 9:01 a.m. the breakfast lounge no longer felt like a quiet morning retreat, but like a room holding its breath, and the floor manager stood near the host stand staring at his tablet as another notification appeared, his fingers tightening around the device, while a second alert followed immediately after, and Emily Carter watched from across the room, her certainty now steady as she observed the subtle unraveling of confidence in his posture, while Marcus Ellington remained seated, calm and composed, his empty plate pushed slightly aside, his coffee nearly finished, and the sunlight stretching across the polished floor reflected softly against his table, as if the room itself had shifted to center around him without a single raised voice. And at 9:02 a.m. the floor manager stepped aside, lowering his voice as he answered a call, but the tension in his expression made it clear that the conversation carried weight, his tone formal, careful. "Yes, I understand immediate compliance." "Of course," he said quietly, and when he ended the call he remained still for a moment, glancing toward Marcus again, this time with unmistakable uncertainty, while the hostess adjusted her posture, her earlier confidence replaced by cautious attention, and the servers moved more deliberately now, their tone softer, their movements careful, as if the entire team had suddenly become aware of an invisible presence guiding the moment. and at 9:04 a.m. the floor manager approached Marcus once more. This time slower than before, his tone respectful. "Sir, I hope your breakfast met expectations," he said, and Marcus looked up calmly, his gaze steady. "It did," he replied, his voice even, and the simplicity of the response left the manager searching for words, his earlier authority now replaced by hesitation. While behind him, Emily whispered quietly to another server, "Corporate does not call like that unless something serious is happening," and the server nodded, glancing toward Marcus again, and the shift became undeniable as the hostess moved to clear space near the windows, her movements deliberate, while another server quickly refreshed Marcus's water glass without being asked, and Marcus noticed the change, not with satisfaction, but with quiet awareness, because he had seen this pattern before, the moment when assumptions dissolved and respect quietly replaced them. And at 9:06 a.m. the floor manager's tablet buzzed again, and this time his expression changed completely, his shoulders tightening slightly as he read the message, and he looked toward Marcus once more, the realization now unmistakable, while Emily took a small breath, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "It is happening." And across the room the calm rhythm of breakfast continued, but beneath it the power dynamic had shifted completely, and Marcus remained seated, calm, composed, and silent, as the room adjusted around the truth that had finally surfaced. At 9:08 a.m. the breakfast lounge had fully transformed, not in noise but in presence, and Marcus Ellington sat calmly with his empty coffee cup while the sunlight stretched across the marina outside, the boats drifting slowly below as if time itself had slowed inside the room, and the floor manager stood near the host's stand holding his tablet with both hands, his expression no longer confident, but measured, as if he were carefully recalculating every decision made in the last 30 minutes. And Emily Carter remained still near the service station, her certainty now quiet and grounded, watching as the shift settled across the team. And at 9:09 a.m. the floor manager finally stepped toward Marcus again, his movements deliberate, his tone respectful. "Mr. Ellington," he said carefully, the name spoken aloud for the first time, and the moment landed softly but powerfully across the room, because several staff members paused mid-movement, their attention drawn instantly, while Marcus looked up calmly, his expression unchanged. "Yes," he replied gently, and the manager nodded. "I would like to apologize if your experience this morning did not reflect our standards," he continued, his voice steady but cautious, and Marcus held his gaze for a brief moment before responding. "I appreciate that," he said quietly, and the simplicity of his tone carried more authority than any raised voice could have, and the manager nodded again, stepping slightly to the side, while the hostess adjusted her posture, and another server quietly refreshed Marcus's coffee without being asked, and Emily exhaled slowly, watching the room settle into a new rhythm built on awareness instead of assumption. And at 9:11 a.m. Marcus stood slowly from his seat, his movements calm and unhurried, and the subtle sound of the chair sliding back drew quiet attention from nearby tables, while he placed a few folded bills neatly on the table, though everyone knew he did not need to, and the floor manager spoke again. "Your breakfast is on us this morning," he said respectfully, and Marcus shook his head gently. "No, thank you," he replied, his voice calm. "I prefer to pay." And the manager nodded, understanding that the gesture mattered, and as Marcus stepped toward the exit, the staff subtly parted their attention toward him, not dramatically, just quietly, and Emily met his gaze briefly as he passed, and he gave a small nod, acknowledging her calm presence, and then he paused near the entrance, turning slightly as he spoke in a voice that remained gentle but carried through the quiet room. "Respect should never depend on what someone wears or where they sit," he said calmly, and the words settled into the air like a final note, simple and steady. And then Marcus Ellington stepped into the morning light, leaving behind a breakfast lounge that felt quieter, more thoughtful, and permanently changed.